Welcome to today's episode of
Combo with the calls.
subtitle No Sons, No Limits.
I love it. Absolutely no limits.
So,
Well, before we got into the topic, do you want to just plug out our treats on that?
plug away.
Yes. Yeah. You're starting to make sense of your work.
We are going to start a men's cohort May 4th. Sorry. That was another, we'll call that one a squirrel instead of a rabbit. So, men's cohort for Making Sense of Your Worth, May 4th, Monday evenings, 6:30 to 8:30 p.m. Central Standard Time. You can go onto our website, Column Collective. You can register online for that. If there's any issues, feel free to reach out. Brit, 2 T's, at columncollective.com. We also have a men's retreat. Guys, if you want a little adventure in your life, June 24th, we're going to be up in the beautiful Wyoming wilderness. Same thing. Go to columncollective.com. You can find all the information on that. It is going to be a small group, 8 participants only. So feel free to reach over, sign up.
Yep. And then,
and
then we'll have the women's retreat in Wyoming as well. This will be our third
annual.
Yes. Again, have limited space. Only taking 8. There's only spaces left. So you're interested in there.
Maybe we should create our own commercial spots amidst our conversation.
Maybe.
Well, what was it? Glade. That's our title sponsor. Plug it in.
Yes. About the new website, they can follow Collective. You can find all of it on the spot, and I'm so grateful for that. Yeah.
It is up and going, courtesy of this lady.
You played a big part too. You helped shake and bake.
What else do you want to plug?
I think that's it. But definitely, any guy, just I can't speak highly enough for the Making Sense of Your Worth curriculum. If you're struggling with connection or just performance in general, and you just feel like you can't seem to get it right, and you don't know what you're missing, I feel like that is an incredible place to start.
Yes, it will be 16 hours well spent.
Yes, life-changing. It can be life-changing if you do the work. So I think that's it.
Well, that is a deep subject.
Well, we're getting ready to dive into even a deeper subject.
That's why I said it the way I did.
So I get the privilege of interviewing you today on something that actually I don't even know. Something even kind of brought up this curiosity in me in the last couple of weeks. I was like, there are a lot of questions I would love to ask that I've never asked you around this.
So just so everybody knows, this is not rehearsed. I have no idea what questions that she's going to ask me. All I know is the topic that got put into shared notes over podcast conversations that we try to kind of keep going. So
yes. So this will be fun for both of us. And yeah.
I love this because I am such a processor. I like just being able to try to have really authentic dialogue around things, that this ends up being something that you're a part of rather than it being a conversation where we necessarily have, here's the answers, you plug and play, because we're not going to sleep with your conscience at night.
Yeah, for sure.
And so I think that's the beauty of having a convo with the columns. You just get to be a part of something that we this is not scripted, which is why we're going deep.
And so I've been hanging on to this one until we can record. So I'm like, oh, I want to ask him so many questions, but I'm gonna wait.
Okay.
Um, yeah, so I have been processing. We both are big on um, well, we have only daughters. We have 4 daughters, and we have one granddaughter and another granddaughter on the way. So
Sure. Well, small disclaimer.
yeah.
2 of our girls are married, so we have sons
Yes,
in the marriage.
yes, which has been so fun to have more men in the house whenever we get
I have
together.
welcomed it. However, I love the ladies. I love all of our ladies.
Yes. Yeah. And you have shared in your story, you were raised with only sisters, 2
Correct.
sisters. So your whole life you've been surrounded by women. And we are passionate though about and probably because we have all girls about really raising um powerful women.
Right.
And when I say powerful, that love powerfully well too.
Correct.
Um And so when I started thinking about this, um, I was not raised in an environment that particularly empowered women. Um, was raised in a pretty oppressive, women oppressed religion until mid teens. You were not particularly raised in a church environment that empowered women.
Correct.
Yeah. So that just, I was like, how did he learn? How did he learn to do this? How did he learn, for what, the value of women and then how to empower them? Because I do feel like you've done an incredible job of championing me. Like you have always been like my greatest supporter and just ready to back me up and support, and you pretty much tell me I can do anything I put my mind to, right? Like you think that that I believe that I was telling me to do. You championed me in that. So yeah, help me understand. Well, first me paint the picture. What do you feel like was modeled to you um growing up with women? Or if you want to, we can take pause and just tell me what you're feeling right now.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of maybe several things. Um, a lot of times we have a family of origin story, and my mom being the second oldest of 9, the first female, I was subjected to a story that she retold quite often in both her experience with church, religion, and maybe the hurt of not being permitted to bring what she was given to the table. But as you started sharing a while ago, like, how did I learn? I think the biggest question that I wrestled with was even, Peyton and Kinley's questions to me when they were young, wanting to understand why they didn't have space. And I think part of what I'm feeling is just the sadness and the hurt that religion somehow chooses to portray a narrative that half the attribute of God is not welcome. And I've long held this belief that if Jesus would have entertained a covenant marriage in the earth, Mary Magdalene would have probably been his wife, which was one of the first people back to the tomb and was the one that was asked to go tell the disciples. And so there are parts of the feminine attributes that have just been so dismissed.
For sure.
Um, so being raised in an environment that didn't necessarily hold space for what women brought to the table, um, and it being very sexist in what was permitted, um, seeing the giftings in our girls, I don't know what to do with my willingness to tolerate a space that doesn't allow parts of them to be permitted,
Yeah.
and so I think for me, in my own journey of not necessarily trying to revolt against theology and for sure not anti-church, but I do believe that we kind of live in a space that we often just embrace certain things and avoid hard conversations because somehow we've just decided that these are the rules. And I think I am wired to challenge the reasoning behind things, not because I need everybody to answer to me. But I don't necessarily see it that way, but I have shared this story so frequently more of late. Um, I don't remember if it's been on this or not, but I can remember we moved from West Texas uh, about the age of around 4 years old. So I was born in West Texas. We moved to Oklahoma, but all of my family was back in New Mexico. And I can remember I would have been about 6 in this time frame, and we had gone back um, to visit family. And I can't remember if we were going or coming, but we had stopped at a Sonic in some just West Texas town. And we were in this Lincoln huge boat of a car, probably 80 or 1981, 82. And I can remember as we pulled into park, my family's dad was driving, mom was up front. Both of my sisters were either side of me in the back seat of this car. And this cop car pulls into the Sonic, and everybody just started going off on trying to convince me that the cop was here for me. And for whatever reason, I have just never done well with teasing. And I can remember how frustrated I got, mostly at my sisters, and I think my mom a little bit. So the cop pulls up, a couple of bays down, and my intolerance of this whole thing was so strong that as a little 6-year old, I crawled out of the car, walked to a stranger in a town that we didn't even live in, to a cop, no less, and said, "They're telling me that you're here for me." And he looks over at my family and he looks back at me and he laughs and he makes a joke. But he affirmed everything that I knew to be true, which was I wasn't in trouble. And so I say all that to go into a lot of what I began to try to process was, why am I subjecting these girls to something that I don't have a good answer for? And I don't know what to do with their questions. And so it kind of led me to say, what is it that I don't know in this culture, in this environment? And I'm not saying they're wrong. I just don't know that it's right either.
Yeah, for sure. And I think having girls that definitely is a shift, right? Like you're like, oh wow, what do I do? Like I want to do, I want them to be everything that God created them to be. When you were raised, though, like growing up, and we don't know what we don't know, but what do you feel like? Did you ever question? Did you ever have any questions around it, or did you just accept what you were taught as this is just the way it is? Like, did you have what were your thoughts as a teen, as a young boy around the way women were treated in the church?
Yeah, I don't think that it ever came up until my girls started asking me questions. I think that was the point that I found myself needing to try to have an honest conversation. Again, I heard stories from my mom, but I don't think that it provoked my curiosity to the point to question why it was the way it was.
How about your dad? Like, did your how many conversations did your dad have around it? Because he had dog, he has two sisters.
But, the dynamics with my dad, he wasn't raised ever in the church.
Yeah,
He didn't he didn't get baptized until after I was born. Um, and so a lot of kind of the faith belief system was really my mom's side of the family. And I don't know whether I could put language to it back then or not. I think that there was just certain things that I just chose not to question.
yeah,
If it doesn't directly relate to me, I don't oftentimes pick it up. And so I only reference the sonic experience because I had a whole family making a statement towards me that I knew wasn't true. I just didn't know what to do with it. And so I think that was the first time that I felt confronted in what my belief system was when my girls began to ask this question. That was an equivalent confrontation to me. Does that make sense?
sure, for sure.
And and so I don't know that I really had a grid to try to question it prior to that point.
How old do you think they were whenever they started asking questions?
Um, it seems like around Peyton's 5 or 6, maybe somewhere in there. Could have been a little bit older. Some of that timeline it's very fuzzy. But the other honest statement is, if you don't know what you don't know because you were never subjected to a different environment, this is the practical, like, honest response. It wasn't until I stopped being involved in a denomination that I even realized that it was termed sensationism. I didn't know what that word was.
Right, right.
And so I think that's the part that when we hear the word you don't know what you don't know, it's hard to maybe reconcile that when you've never been exposed to anything different.
Yeah,
And so that probably was a limiting factor in me questioning anything, because that was the only exposure that I ever had. And
yeah.
and that was 7 generations worth.
So we met though, right? Around that journey, around that time. Um, I never felt like oppressed or like you were trying to squelch me. Well, how did that play out as a spouse?
I think some of it was, well, not some of it. If my prayer with God was that these non-negotiables match up before I get my heart, and you met those non-negotiables, then there was a moment that you shared with me, "Hey, this environment doesn't really work, but I'm not asking you to stop attending." That was the point with which I chose to get more curious about what you understood that I didn't, because this was all I ever knew. And so I couldn't dismiss what you were saying, knowing some of your own story, recognize that you were absolutely an answer to a prayer, and then somehow think that I better understood something that you were trying to share with me. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I think, I mean, we've talked about this. Like, we thought we had done a ton of work and had asked all the questions before we got married. And then we look back and we're like, I was just so homesick for you. I was just so like, I knew that I knew, let's just get married. So I don't think I ever questioned whether or not I would be, I never had a doubt that I would not, let me rephrase that. I trusted that I would be supported in the journey that I felt like in my purpose and callings that I felt like God was calling me into. I felt like I would be supported by you in that. And so that's where I find it interesting because we were still in that. Well, I started to hang with you in that environment, and it was like, hey, that like you shared that doesn't really work for me. But I don't feel like even when I was attending there that I felt that from you.
Yeah, but I also believe that we can sometimes, the thing that I know to be true about my character or my nature is I'm very loyal, and I will continue to engage. This has been something that I have seen show up in my life. I can say that I have a relationship with God, but if God pivoted, did I pivot with him or did I stay loyal? And so a lot of my habit would be, well, I don't have a good reason not to engage this. And so why would I stop? This probably takes us in a completely different conversation that I want to be really careful in, because what I'm not trying to say is that I don't value what I learned, what I was exposed to, what, but I do believe that theologically we sometimes get into some ditches that at the end of the day create more separation than I think was intended.
Yeah. Yeah. And I definitely want to stay honoring.
And so to answer your question, there are there are things that God puts in us that sometimes don't get revealed or even manifested until the right season. So Romans 11:29 says the gifts and callings of God are irrevocable. But I couldn't have said, you know, being raised in church my whole life, reading the Bible completely through, a number of times. Certain aspects of that will not stand out to you until you're ready to actually steward the revelation. And I don't know that I was in a place to steward it because it wasn't necessarily in a partnership that would have been supported. So by the time that you came along and that became a covenant marriage, I believe that that was the ability for me to try to then come alongside. Because even biblically, when we start thinking about covenant and the way that Jesus described himself, he says, "My yoke is easy, my burden is light." Well, why did he communicate the analogy of a yoke if it wasn't side by side?
Yeah.
But religion doesn't communicate that with sex, specifically religion, the term religion,
For sure. Yeah. I guess I could go off on all of this and do a teach. Yeah.
right? But I think
Yeah.
that was where, again, when you shared feedback, I'm not asking you said, I'm not asking for me to stop going. You just couldn't continue because there was a measure of religion that I wasn't aware of because I had not experienced more hurt and manipulation and legalism to the degree that you had. So it actually didn't register that way. Was there some questions that I began to process? Sure. But again, my loyalty didn't compel me to go and explore because it just doesn't feel very. I'm not a Baskins Robin type guy. Like I'm not going to run around and try 31 flavors until I tell you which one's my favorite.
You're a truth guy, truth seeker. Yeah, justice.
Um, and so I think for me, there's probably more in some of the reasoning behind that. One of which, I've shared this part before. When you experience watching hurt in front of you, maybe without a grit, you definitely don't want to be guilty. And so because my mom was basically a mother to a lot of her siblings, I was not wanted. After my sister, she was done. My dad had to beg for me. And so I always carried the sensitivity of in my first marriage, I had 2 girls. The youngest was 6 months old when my dad died. And and after losing that relationship for whatever reason I didn't want to have, boy, at the expense of my girls feeling like they mattered. Because unintentionally, I think that that's something that my sisters experience. That's not for me to manage, but it is real. Like it is maybe a part of the sensitivity.
But I even marvel with that, like, you had the awareness that your dad wanted a son, and you had the awareness that there was maybe some hurt that was created in that, and yet you didn't you you didn't, you didn't replicate that unhelp. Like, you chose something different. You saw the value in it, like,
Whether it's something different or not, I think that I still don't understand this part of me. It is just the truth that I have found consistently in my life. And so scripture says that children are the inheritance of God, right? No matter how much I love that father son dynamic, and no matter how much I watched that actually create a lot of hurt in the loss of my dad, I didn't want to try to recreate something that was going to take me away of 2 things that was a gift to me to begin. Like there's no way that I can divorce the truth of that scripture. Having 2 daughters and then still maybe wanting a son and then not recognize that there's still a gift, their inheritance, that they still are equally as valuable because it's not about a sex to begin with. Scripture never says that sons are the inheritance of God. It says children. And so, in the awareness of where religion overemphasizes the masculine attributes of God, I have watched where the things that are needed, even for men sometimes, which is the compassion, the nurture, the 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 tenderness. Yeah, how do I continue to just steward what is in front of me? And and so even after you and I got married, there was, a small conversation of do we have ours? And we just never landed on a lot of peace. So yeah, I'll let you keep asking questions because I can give context for maybe where some of the awareness evolved from, but we were created to have impact, whether it was genetically affiliated to us or not.
you say has been one of the most challenging things as a dad to raise a boy?
I think the biggest one is wanting to help them understand the susceptibility of cosmetology and beauty industry as it relates to how they feel about themselves. And that being a really challenging balance between not wanting to show up critical towards maybe prolonged mirror times and unnecessary makeup, but still advocating what is true, which is there's a lot of pressure that women feel to look a certain way that I don't think is fair. And I'm only one voice to an industry and a society. But it doesn't change my conviction on that.
What would you say the furthest shift has been in your theology or perspective or around women, particularly operating in fixing patterns and purposes?
This would be an indirect way to answer it.
You indirect. Sorry. That just struck me funny.
This is captured on video. If you were to go out and you were to poll the general population, and the question would be, who comes to mind when you think of somebody that represents really authentic love or genuine love? And they would identify as a woman. Who would you say? My present
day modeled to in my life, just like outside of Jesus, starting from Jesus.
outside. I would play on the process. It's just that you just go ask random people, they would probably refer to Mother Teresa.
Oh, okay.
There's something to be said about the general public's familiarity with a woman that has demonstrated something that a lot of men, I'm not saying a lot of men do it. I'm saying I believe that we went and polled a general population, which would include non-believers, it would include people that aren't just up in the Bible Belt, that are just saturated with an aspect of religion. I think a lot of people identify with the authenticity of Mother Teresa and the way that she selflessly loved. If that woman just had that type of political impact with people that don't even know her, where is that at in church? And again, because I am a man, and because I have been asked a question from my motives that I believe that many women in this world have asked even God, what do I do? And so for me, it was wanting to be willing to answer. You hear a lot of people in maybe religion and fear communicate a response that said, well, I'm going to have to answer to God. And I believe that's true. We all will. I just don't feel like it probably looks the way that most people process it.
But I don't think that was anything like the way most of us have been taught.
That is the reason why I said it that way, is because when, again, I remember Peyton walking up to me at that age with that type of innocence, asking that question, how can I represent something about God that is predominantly going to be viewed through this masculine lens? Because that's often the way it's communicated. What is my responsibility to answer that? And the weight of that has been what has challenged what I just agreed to versus what I actually want to represent. Not defend,
Yeah.
represent.
What would you say you want to say?
That just because it's male doesn't mean that it can't be kind or that it can't be safe or that it can't be understand, or that it can't be empathetic. You know, all of that is a human construct needs. It's not women need that more than men, which is what I see happen so often when you start talking to guys. I'm like, dude, your needs are just the same as a woman. In that, you need safety, you need validation, you need nurture, comforting. Those are typically something that a lot of women are good at.
Well, I think honestly, because of the way a lot of religion is taught, it was required that women need needs.
On the practical side, there is a fundamental way that God created a woman to bring about sustainment of life. That statement then doesn't make me want to compete with you because I'm not trying to actually figure out how to birth and nurture babies. I marvel at a woman's capacity to endure that dynamic, right? But it doesn't mean that I can't begin to try to partner and grow is that are still fundamentally necessary because that's the human construct. It's not sex specific. And so we all need sticking. We all need aspects of nurture, comfort, and I'm just not agree that God has got a responsibility to grow in those areas without a need of perfection because it's not a competition. Like I recall in the early stages of the growth, there were some things that seemed to be maybe by an inch, and comfort was usually one of those.
Still true today. And she was kind of sorry for it.
But if I have been an authoritative dad, that doesn't happen. If I have been talking at them, that isn't the way that they want to show up. They're not looking to run to refuge because it's not safe. And so I think that's a big part of the lens with which I process even how I read it. Yes, he's all that. Yes, that is a male descriptive, but he's not relegated to a sex. Jesus did manifest as a man in the flesh.
What do you feel like has been a challenge or an opportunity for them to, as you like, really support me as a spouse? What have you found?
Well, I think part of the challenge is you're not. And so in the times of wanting to be understood, we're seeking to understand. There's just times when I don't get that. And so I'll make sure that that doesn't feel like you're being rejected, but it also doesn't require me to have to agree because I just don't know if I'm ever going to understand it through your lens. I can be empathetic to it. I can try to validate it, but I may not. And so the challenge is to remain curious to something that is so counter to it. That would be probably what I would say is a big challenge. But it's also in the same way that I am really appreciative of your courage to say, I'm not asking you to stop doing this. I just can continue to be amiss. And here's some reasoning in that. I've never heard anybody communicate healthy dialogue around religious power and control games on stuff.
Yeah.
Right? Did I hear aspects of my mom share stories? Sure.
but we didn't have a grid for emotional intelligence in that conversation. So there probably had not been a capacity to understand it that way. Whereas by the time you and I got connected, I had already started the journey. There was awareness around what emotional intelligence can give. And so partnering that with a spiritual component, then it began to allow me to say, what are you saying that I don't understand, but I know that it's true?
I feel like, well, I think those are amazing. They're for incredible women. And I feel like they all are really, they love big. Like they love really big. And so when we talk about powerful women, I don't feel like girl that I have what they're coming for.
I would use this language. We're not trying to put that to be a competitive voice.
Right. Right. And I feel like that they value, well, the two that are married and they're crazy about their spouses. And I watch them and things with their spouses so well. Like really quite them, but vice versa. Like they chose spouses that really changed them. Cut it back to that side by side. Yeah. I have that perspective on why it works. So what would you say if you were to talk to another guy that was raising daughters if they were young? How would you say that? What would be like maybe perspectives that you have used or things that you have taught instilled in your kids that you feel like they were able to walk into that kind of speed without doing that competitive voice? That was a lot.
It was a lot, but I think the way that I would answer maybe goes back to the experience that I recognize in my dad. Again, it's just the awareness from it's not an indictment. But the one thing that I have language for now that I probably didn't, but it was a gap, was my dad didn't know how to point me past himself and his limited understanding of his own ability with God. And so for me, I've always wanted to make sure that I didn't ever put myself in a bad spot. With the kids, because my humanity was always show up at some point and let them down with no intention other than I'm human. And so wanting to make sure that we, one, model real authentic interaction with God. But seek to understand the way that God wired our kids, specifically our daughters. Because I think that there are two of our girls that I relate to more and maybe some similarities. And I think there's two that you relate to more in similarities. So just because it's not as familiar to me with two of them and more familiar, I think it goes back to I don't want to get into the favorites conversation or a more relatable conversation.
Yeah.
And with that lens of making sure that I'm not the definitive on answering all those questions, that there's humility to say, hey, I don't know, but I want to explore that with you. Because I just want to be careful that I don't end up representing something that in my limited understanding of the vastness of God, I misrepresent.
Yeah.
And then because I watch some of that happen, I don't want to set our kids up for failure because I'm representing something that they respect and value. Specifically with daughters, to continue to answer your question, I think it's been part of the beautiful learning curve and valuing your own relationship with God and what I have been able to learn in the way that you interact with God, the way that you are wired to have that intimacy with the Lord. there are things that I get to learn from you that I can then better see in, some of our girls that without our sharing, without our vulnerability and some of that intimacy, I would not hold space for. So if there's conversations with another man who's raising daughters, the first thing is you better be responsible for how you steward your house and the belief system. Because if you're passing them off to somebody else that's defined by a denomination, you've missed all of what Ephesians 6 does. Because it's as loving your household the way Christ loved us, and he died for all of us, including denominations. I don't know how many people preach that, though. Because it requires us to confront where we want to self-protect against the things that we don't feel adequate in appearing. Which again takes us into a different conversation, but I think that's the part for me that I don't have all of the answers to equipping and empowering. There's been plenty of them that, this is just the brain side. I've got two that I have a relationship with, and it sucks. I've got two sisters that there's no relationship. But if that defines the way I want to love women, then all of that hurt is now interfering with what can still happen.
So you and Bob talking about Bob opened the women's retreat. He has two girls. Kind of you both talk a lot about how to space for women. When you think you wanted to watch and even raise his girls that we combined in the hunting world.
Yes, I think it goes back to my statement. I want to be able to answer. And there's definitely a lot of things that I can't give an answer to. But I do have capacity to answer for what I'm in control of. And so if it's a space that I've been given permission to influence, then I want to steward that regardless of what sex is in. Me, it's that simple.
Yeah. Which I also I would love to get your perspective on we have girls that have participated in horses, we've exposed them to all sorts of activities, and so you can empower them. And you you want to challenge it.
I've been told. and I have tested accordingly. Maybe I just for number 8. The thing that I did this from my dad. He was aware of this is I never felt the pressure to embrace his passion. And so when it came to horses, as much as I know that he loved horses, I never felt the expectation that I had to somehow agree with that. Mm-hmm. And so my own curiosity, my passion for horses wasn't necessarily because sometimes people retell a family origin story that they adopted, maybe something because that was the access point to a parent. I don't ever feel like that was the case with my dad. And even my experience with around horses, I didn't necessarily feel like I got a critical dad when I didn't interact appropriate to his expectation of that dynamic. And so I think that for me was part of the lens that answers this question, which is I want that it doesn't matter whether it's male or female. Mm-hmm. I don't need my kids to enjoy my passion because they're not me. And if that's true, how do I make sure that I see what passions God has given them and then just be the biggest advocate and champion and challenger and continuing to move them in that direction. Because at the end of the day, if we believe that we were created with purpose, then what's also true is that every single second something's trying to buy against that. And so I think as parents, but specifically as a father, it's my job to refuse to watch them agree to something that I don't believe is true biblically, let alone from God Himself. Environmentally, are there a lot of those things that again, it goes back to my, like, I can appreciate that a woman spends time, but I despise when you believe that that's something that has to be done before you can be received. I hate it. Absolutely. Somehow you showing up as you are is not. Again, there's a lot of it's vying against that for a lot of reasons that that's not a popular voice. But again, it's a bit of the telling side. I'm only responsible for me, and I want to manage that and create a culture where it's safe for feedback shared when that is happening.
Sure.
Because again, our command is not show up. If I'm stressed or I'm fatigued or I'm not in a full spot personally, then you nor our kids are going to get a safe version. So, yeah.
No, life is gross. It's fun. We have an amazing son in law. He takes the little granddaughter 3 days of the farm and I told the tractor and feeds the cows. I love it. It's so fun. It's so fun. I love it. Well, yeah.
So, me, you had a question.
I'm not a question, but I think you answered the last question I had was, yeah, what legacy do you hope to leave? Wow.
Well,
You kind of shaped that, but particularly.
I do believe that we've seen that in the first two boys. That continues to be our prayer, regardless, is that they will be secure enough in themselves that they can partner or have partnership in the things that each of them are here to do. Because we are all created for purpose. What that looks like, I think, is where sometimes it gets lost. But I think legacy-wise, that we would be known for whole healthy families, and that requires that the feminine expression be just as celebrated and welcome as the male. And I think that was a bit of the time, just wanting to show up and help support you. Time in prison, 3.5 years of hurting, and it's not my job to fix all that hurt. But if I can show up and be that allows them to be challenged and to believe because of their experience, at some point he says, "Well, matter." We're spirit beings at that point, already taken.
Mhm.
And So it's more about being out, leaving a legacy, wanting to love God. I feel a little dehydrated. Stay tuned for the next episode of Gumbo with the Columns. Thanks for joining us.